All right, 5-second warning, Steve. Go ahead. Yep, go ahead, Steve.
Okay, we're live.
Yep.
Hello, everybody. My name is Steve Elkins. I'm a fellow in the Explorers Club since 2016, and I want to welcome you to another one of the Monday afternoon or evening lectures, depending where you are in the world. Today, we're going to feature Jess Phoenix, another fellow in the Explorers Club, and her partner in this wonderful lecture you're about to hear, and a TV series about hunting for Atlantis. Everybody knows about Atlantis. I know I do, and I'm sure all of you do. And I'm really excited to hear what they're doing, in particular, because I have been in my personal life, in my exploration life, a person who has chased myths, even under great duress and under a lot of naysayers, and found out that by thinking a bit outside the box, using the latest technologies and doing research and just looking somewhere else, sometimes these myths turn out to be true. So without further ado, I think it's really important that everybody listen carefully to Jess and Stel Pavlou. Sorry about that. I keep on screwing up his name. He's laughing already. Pavlou.
It's Pavlou.
Pavlou like the dog. No, Stel Pavlou. But here we are at the Explorers Club. I have my flag here. So we know this is an Explorers Club flag lecture, even though it's not a flag expedition. It's a flag lecture. I'm starting a new trend. So take it away, Jess and Stel. I can't wait to hear what you have to say. And I'm sure the audience will have a lot of comments of all kinds for this.
Well, and you can see that I need to have a sense of humor. I mean, that's one of the main things in doing field expeditions or filming a TV show. So way to start us off, Steve. Thank you. And yeah, it's Stel. And Stel, you can say your name how it's supposed to be pronounced. We want to get it right.
Stel Pavlou.
And there you go with that excellent intonation. But yeah, so we are, well, Stel is technically the host and I am the co-host of this series on Discovery Channel. And we're going to give you a little bit of info about it. And Stel is going to kick it off explaining a little bit, but as we get into it, you'll see a couple video clips. So prepare for that. And oh, you know what? I didn't do the optimize thing. I'm going to unshare it and reshare it. There we go. Okay. So Stel, can you give me a thumbs up if you see my screen?
I can see it.
So this is for everybody. If you're, following along at home and you have a personal interest in exploration research and how we get things that have a grounding in science onto.
Just make sure you go full screen here.
Oh, sorry. What was that? Oh,
we can see the rest of PowerPoint. Just make sure you go full screen.
Oh, weird. Oh, you know what? It's the wrong slide. Hang on. It's not the wrong. It's the wrong screen. There we go. Try that. Okay. Better?
Perfect.
Okay. See, technical difficulties. We've been doing this for what, a year and a half now? We should be perfect, but so essentially, anytime you try to bring anything to life on television, it's going to be a bit of a mess. And I wanted to give everybody a little bit of levity before we dive into the more serious aspects of Stel's hypothesis about Atlantis that kicks this all off. So this is a video, so make sure your sound's on. I hope it's on.
This is us on a peaceful boat trip, and
that's who's accompanying us on our peaceful boat trip.
It feels incredibly natural.
Yep, this is how we do it.
Everywhere I go, there's two cameras and a microphone in front of me constantly.
It's just how we do things here.
It works for her. This is actually quite quiet. She ran for Congress. It's usually 6 cameras.
It's true. This is pretty low key.
From that side, we saw.
So There we go. So of course that was just the, any of you who've worked on TV before probably recognize that scene. Everything you do, even if you're trying to look natural or cool, there's a horde of people around you talking and changing things and trying to make you look good. So I'll let Stel take it away now into the technical aspects of why this show even got made.
It was a bet, really, in the pub. No, it wasn't. so I've researched Atlantis for what, 25 years. And I started collecting, all the different theories and looking up facts and figures and whatnot. And over time, I realized that there was something missing. The story apparently comes from Egypt, but despite lots and lots of searching, I couldn't find much material at all of looking at the Atlantis story from an Egyptian perspective. And so I ended up at a date of the early 5th millennium BC, which is where we begin with this journey. So if you look at this here, these are very roughly, the different civilizations and societies that existed in Europe and the Near East around that time of the early 5th millennium BC. And it's a range. It's 4,900, give or take 250 years. It's not precise. It's based on the data that I had available. If you can go to if we've got anything on the next slide, I'm not sure.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So when you get to 4,900 plus or minus 250, suddenly there are these phenomena that occur all over Europe, which are these ditched and fortified enclosures, and nearly 200 of them have concentric circles, which is what Plato describes. And Plato's city is quite unusual for the time that he wrote. Everything's got, grid patterns, and well, except for parts of Athens, but it's a whole other discussion. But so what you're looking at is a time that is quite unusual in human history. So like the Cossack circle in Germany has been dated to exactly 4,900, and they think it was probably sort of astronomical, maybe, for planting crops. So having a city that sort of matches that description of what's going on in this time was quite, is it a coincidence? Is this something genuine? A genuine discovery, or is it just coincidental? So I started looking at other things that happened in that time, and Jess has got another slide there.
I do.
And thank you, Jess, for putting this together, by the way, because for those of you who don't know, I've been moving house for the last 3 days, and I finished at 11 o'clock last night, and I'm knackered. So Jess stepped in.
This is how we do it.
So this is from Splash Codes. They're not running anymore, as most probably are aware, but these are all of the different underwater sites up until about 5 or 6 years ago that have been found around the European coast. There's 2,500 of them. And they range all the way from like Bronze Age all the way up to Chalcolithic and previous. So I started looking at this, and what's going on? Well, early 5th millennium BC, you've got the last pulse, meltwater pulse of the Ice Age. And so you've got a whole bunch of flooding going on, and you've got tectonic stresses. So I'm like, okay, so we've got that, we've got the city. What about this massive war? And then I discovered that, there's a thing called a Y chromosome bottleneck, where there was only one man for every 17 women, because the rest of them all got killed in warfare. And that's written right into the genetic code. So I'm like, oh, we're starting to see something here, and is it a mirage, or are these real connections? And so that's basically where we end up from my hypothesis of using king lists. That's how I ended up with my date. I don't know if we've got anything on that.
I have this terrifying looking table. This table is frightening, so before your eyes roll back in your head, Stel is going to explain.
Don't read it. Okay, so there are different ways of counting time. Okay, so Athenians had, as you're no doubt aware, archon lists. Every year there's a mayor of Athens and blah, 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 and you can go back 600 odd years or so. And then there's the Olympic calendar, which is every 4 years. Egyptians don't count time that way. They had king lists, and they would do a list of which ruler, in what order, and how long they reigned. And it could be 6 months or 72 years or whatever it is. The problem with those lists is that there's no indication on them when someone ruled concurrently. Right, so like a king and a prince, or a queen and a son, or whatever. And so you can make mistakes. You can double count years by accident, because, you know, during intermediate periods, you know, north and south would go their separate ways, and you'd end up with 2 rulers, and you'd have like usurpers and that kind of stuff. Now, these lists are quite incomplete. There's 2 versions of Manetho's list, which is from the Ptolemaic period. And you've got Africanus and you've got Eusebius, and the numbers don't quite match up. And so I was like, well, can we find, you know, a median and a mean, and sort of try and work out an average of where we are with these rulers. And then on top of that, you've got archaeology, and the archaeology numbers are completely different again. So Egyptologists already know all this stuff, but a lot of classicists don't. And so they'll say they do, but then when you get into a conversation, I discovered they actually don't, but that's a whole other thing. So what you do is you basically replace these lists with the actual time that they ruled from archaeology, and then take into account when there were concurrent rulers, and you end up with a percentage difference, like you'd have in a store for working out sales prices, and the percentage difference between what a king list says and what reality says. And then so you take an Egyptian king list, and it ends up being, it's almost like 51% less time was taken. So when you apply that to Plato's 9,000 years before Solon, you have a rough idea of when 9,000 years occurred through an Egyptian king list. I don't know if that's making sense. It all gets very, very technical and dry, but essentially what happens is you end up in the early 4th millennium BC for Atlantis, but then it also, Plato makes a very specific thing about when Egyptian culture started, and the theory also happens to support that Badarian culture in Egypt is like the first pre-dynastic culture. So that all that lined up. So there's all this analysis of the data, and then it's a question of, well, that's all well and good, but does that prove Atlantis existed? No, I still don't know if it existed. It's just a plausible timeline based on actual hard data. It's not me massaging things. This is just simple math. Anybody could sit and calculate this. And
you want to show the graphs?
Oh yeah, go on, show the graphs.
So you have to explain them though.
All right, so this graph is where I'm trying to find the numeric differences between Eusebius and Africanus and all the other different versions of a king list that Plato would have known about. The reason I chose Manetho is because he wrote his list very close to the age when Plato wrote his story, so it's kind of contemporaneous. What you can see over the right-hand side is that all of those king lists line up more or less. And then after about, Dynasty 23, 24, and as you go further back in time, it's all over the place. And the king lists completely, they disagree with each other. So if you go to the next slide, now the brownish red, you can see those are the archaeological dates compared to Manetho's 2 different dates, and what you can see is, again, it tracks pretty closely until you get to about the 23rd dynasty, and then it starts going haywire again. But, and this is what you have to remember, is that some of these dynasties ruled at the same time. So then you have to take away the double counted years and just have pure calendar years, archaeology versus king list. So if we go to the next slide, and that's what we end up with. So all the way up to about dynasty 21, it's pretty close. There's a little peak there, but it's pretty close archaeology to the king list. Then you get between dynasties 12 and 19, and you've got, intermediate periods, and suddenly the king list bears absolutely no relation to the archaeology. So that's where we've got an awful lot of errors going on. And there was a lot of warfare going on. That would explain it. And then further back in time, it's sort of off again, especially around Dynasty 3 and 4, where they start building the pyramids. And Trizomite, I can't figure out why that would. Maybe there's a bunch of made up kings and they all want to take credit for pyramids. I don't know. But the king lists don't match the archaeology. And so that is a nice visual representation of the data I'm using and how I'm trying to extract meaning from it to apply it to Plato. And the reason I do that is because if you read Waterfield's translation of Timaeus and Critias, there is a section where he says, and then the priest and Solon, got together and they worked out how far back it was, generation after generation. And that is an Egyptian method of counting time. It's not Greek. And so that's why I ended up taking this approach. And I hope that have I rabbited on along. Let's go. Is there something else? Or?
Well, I think it's okay. So I think it's important to note that, lots of people have hypotheses about different things. And
Right.
when I got contacted for this show, I'm a volcanologist. I'm a geologist who works on volcanoes and other natural disasters.
Right.
And when they contacted me and said, would you like to do a show about Atlantis? I laughed and rolled my eyes so hard they almost got stuck backwards in my head.
Which is the correct response.
Yes. And so what actually was really interesting to me is when I said, okay, I'll humor my agent. I will humor him and I will go to this. And I met Stel for the first time there. And they came in with, what about if we had Atlantis in Antarctica? And I said, if I say this is BS, like, do you need me to leave right now? And they said, no. We value that. We value that you actually, you're not going to entertain something ridiculous. And I said, okay, well, all right, I'm a little skeptical, but let's see how that works out. And when Stel explained what he did here, he kind of made it more concise and at times more lengthy to me. I said, oh, you know what? Like this is interesting. Let's go see if there's anything to support this. And when they said, you guys are going to go to all these sites and you're going to talk to archaeologists from NYU, from Cambridge, from local archaeological agencies that are, backed by the governments of the various countries. And you're going to see if what they are finding in Stel's time frame matches at all the Plato myth, then, that I'm like, okay, we're just going to go see if this hypothesis, if there's any merit whatsoever. And so that's kind of how the show started. So,
and this is all part of a paper. I mean, this comes out later in the year. This has been peer reviewed and set aside a weekend because it's like 65 pages long. But
yeah. So now let's go to the fun stuff because we've done the academics, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions.
Oh, dead bodies! Excellent.
Dead bodies. Right. So I don't usually deal with stuff like this in my line of work. So one thing that was really interesting for me, coming from geology field science background, was seeing gold and actually caring, because I have seen a lot of gold, like little veins, little deposits, in combination in areas where you have a lot of volcanism. You get hydrothermal and geothermal alteration, and sometimes you'll see copper and gold and other elements. But seeing gold like this on a skeleton and hearing that it was, what was it, Stel, 7,000 years old?
It's about 7,000 years old. It's been dated to between like 4,600 and 4,800, somewhere in there, BC.
BC, oh.
Yeah.
And this is, as you can see on the screen, it says it's Bulgaria, but this was more specifically in Varna, Bulgaria. And Stel, do you want to mention anything about the Varna people?
Well, the Varna people they're actually on that slide earlier. They're one of the contemporary civilizations. They were, as you can see, extreme artisans. I mean, I've been to Cairo and I've seen, the gold there, and this is totally on par with anything you see from sort of like Middle Kingdom Egypt. But it's, 2,000 years earlier. This was a priest king, as a lot of people probably know. This is right around the time when you start to see the first chiefs and chieftains, and they also happen to be priests. There's 300 of these graves. This was the most, decorated, and they've never found the city. They don't know where these people came from. They're also copper workers as well. Copper just started getting mined in Serbia a couple hundred years earlier, and so these are wealthy beyond belief. And that's what attracted us to coming to see Varna, was because Plato describes the wealth. So it's like, well, what does 5th millennium BC wealth look like?
Yeah. And that actually, I mean, to me, this was like, oh, I had no idea. Again, not coming from an archaeology background whatsoever, I had no idea that this type of metalworking was extant at that time. And I would also like to point out for everybody that he actually had a gold penis cap. If you look near the pelvic bones, that little, I don't know, like kind of elongated gold bit, that's what that was. Apparently, that's what we were told by the archaeologists at the museum. So these are in a museum. This is not something we found. That's not the point of the show. Like, we need to learn from local experts. So that's what we do. And this episode is aired. This was the first episode. So if you want to see this and how Discovery actually, shot us looking at it and talking about it, and what we saw in Bulgaria that either fits with Stel's hypothesis or doesn't, that one's already out. So then we also went to Croatia, which was really cool. I had never been to Bulgaria or Croatia. There's not too many active volcanoes in those places. And this that you're seeing a close up of, I describe it rather inelegantly, so I'll get that out of the way, and then Stel can give us the classier version. It's a little animal figurine out of clay, and if you look on the right-hand image, you can see there's a little hole in the butt. Now, that was not a butt hole. That was a hole where they could put little, things to represent a tail of the animal. And what really got me excited about this was how old it is. And this was in a cave called Vela Spila on Korčula, off the kind of like near Split and in Croatia. So Stel, you can tell us more about why this little animal is important.
Well, because this one is from about 12,000 BC, and most human societies are not messing around with clay till about 6,000 BC. So this is like way, way earlier. It's not the oldest one in Europe. I think the oldest is Czech Republic, but it's way up there. So this basically rewrites human history. And the thing is, the interesting thing about talking to the archaeologists at this site was that when they started finding these things, they thought it was an error. They thought it was a mistake from an upper layer and started throwing the damn things away, and they lost about 40 of them. It's heartbreaking. But then when they realized their mistake, they started collecting them, and they're 12,000 BC little figurines.
And I think I also needed to point out, because I keep going, I'm not an archaeologist, because I'm not. But the reason I'm a part of this show at all is because, as Stel points out in the show a lot, Plato described Atlantis as having been destroyed in a day and a night. So that's where I come in for catastrophes. And so even in this cave in Vela Spila, there was volcanic ash deposits that you could see in this stratigraphy. And it's really cool for me because you can date a lot of those eruptions pretty conclusively. And so therefore you can use absolute dating, for certain items, and then relative dating techniques for others. And, if we know the age of one layer, and we find something either above or below it, that tells us, relationally speaking, how old that item was, as long as you can prove that it's not disturbed. But this cave in Croatia had so many really amazing things, including, and of course, doing this talk while the show is still like airing, there's only been 2 episodes aired, means that we can't spoil the entire thing for you. But what we did show, that I don't have a photo of, is a piece of gabbro, which is an intrusive igneous rock. And there's no gabbro near Vela Spila. It would have had to have come from somewhere else, at least 50 miles away by boat. I can't remember if it was miles or kilometers now, but it's far by boat, which would imply that these folks who were making very advanced figurines were also seafaring, or at least trading. And that was essential to the Atlantis story. So, we can't say, yeah, Atlantis is here. But what we can say is that there's evidence of advanced civilizations at these times that could have given rise to the myth, which is really, I think that's the heart of it, right, Stel?
Yeah, pretty much. Just looking at the archaeology that we saw, at Durankalac, which was, they had these they had straight streets with corners and everything, and they had these massive stone walls, and they could build 2-story high buildings, sometimes 3. They had, tattooing. They were, they were doing all these kind of advanced metalworking. They had agriculture running. By any measure, it's civilization, it's society. And so all these things that we're talking about that just don't exist in 9,500 BC, it's all right there in 5,000 BC. And just back to Jess's thing about, Atlantis disappeared in a day and a night. All it says is earthquake in the text. What I didn't know until I met Jess was there's a million bloody types of earthquake, and the earth can kill you in so many ways. And I just was like, well, now I'm petrified to leave the house. So,
well, yeah, you tell me where you live, I'll tell you how you're going to die, be it Earth. But no, it was interesting because, like in Croatia, for example, the show producers weren't sure of an underlying catastrophe. Obviously, Croatia is not what you think of when you think a hotbed of volcanism or earthquakes or anything like that. And I said, oh, well, Croatia has a lot of limestone. And limestone is, if anybody lives in Texas or Florida, you know that it's karst topography, meaning that the limestone gets eaten away by water in the subsurface, and then you can have sinkholes open up. So in Croatia, in order to try to get some dates on when the world's third largest sinkhole opened, to see if it actually matched up with a local myth about a civilization sinking beneath the waves, I rappelled into the world's third largest sinkhole. And Stel was on the side going, are you really doing this? And I'm like, oh yeah, like I do my own stunts here. And that's the thing is we both did, we both did lots of really, interesting things to film the show, to try to, in one case, test a hypothesis. We can't talk about that one yet. It's a really weird boat trip. And it comes up in one of the Greece episodes. And, but we were trying to prove or disprove a part of the myth. And that's really like, it's not saying, oh, this is exactly what happened. It's just saying, is this even possible? And that's really the heart of the show, is what is the possibility that there is an advanced civilization destroyed in a day and a night that matches with the Atlantis myth? So
and that's the thing as well, is that you're talking about a Copper Age advanced civilization. You're not talking about some crazy movie with crystal pyramids and people, and whatever. We're talking about the early 5th millennium BC, and any civilizations from that time kind of, give us an idea of where the myth could have come from. So the Croatia one that just aired last week, we start talking to local historians and find some oral history of a city named Pellegrin that it was rich in agriculture. It had this special metal that didn't have a name, and then it just sank down into the ocean, and just like boom, it was gone. And that sounded like a sinkhole. But more work still needs to be done on that, because I don't know how genuine an oral history is. I would love to go back and spend months there talking to everybody I could find, but it seemed to have some sort of genuine basis, and that's the sort of stuff we need to look for if we're going to hope to find a myth that would funneled its way into Plato's writing.
And so then we also, of course we had to go to Greece, because the most enduring, at least to me as someone who's not an Atlantophile, was, Greece, Santorini. And, I've been to Santorini. I'm very familiar with how large eruptions work at that island. And, basically we tried to look into whether the Minoans were potential, progenitors of that myth. And then we also looked in the Cyclades too. And so this is some on the screen now is an example of, on the left, it's a Cycladian figure. And we actually went to an island called Daskalio and investigated kind of what was going on with these figures and this really unique island that is shaped like a pyramid. And Stel, I don't know if you want to talk more about Daskalio.
Greeks don't build pyramids. So the fact that they have one was a bit of a surprise, because they only really started excavating it about 10 years ago. So it literally looks like the Great Pyramid from a distance. And I guess people just assumed for centuries that it was just a coincidence. But then archaeologists went over there, some great people from Cambridge University, and they were like, oh, look, there's temples and all kinds of things. And it was covered in marble. They brought the marble over, and the original surface would have been gleaming at sea. The trouble is, there's no marble there on that island. They shaped the island so that it would be like a pyramid shape, and nobody lived there either. There were temples. Everything had to be brought over by boat, and you're talking around 3,500 to 3,000 BC. How did they do it? That was the big question for us.
And yeah, that's in an upcoming episode, so we can't spoil it. But what we can mention is that we used objects like those on the right-hand side of the screen. These are bits of obsidian that were shaped into blades. Obsidian is, of course, a volcanic glass, and it is extremely sharp, very glassy. And even just visually from looking at this, if you're not a geologist or volcanologist, you have no background in this, you might recognize that the object on the bottom is a bit more translucent, and the object on the top is a bit more opaque. And that is something that we were actually able to do, was analyze using spectrometry both of these pieces and see that they came from different locations. And then we identified a likely source for the one that was unknown, and then we went and investigated that, and it was a little ways away by boat from where the obsidian had been found. So we're trying to connect all these things, like, is there a circular pattern? Is there a catastrophe that could wipe out a civilization in a day and a night? Is there evidence of 10 kings cooperating? And is there evidence of seafaring and trade? And so these are the kind of things that we would say, oh, this looks good, but it wouldn't meet one of the criteria. And so that's part of what the show is doing, is it's not looking at like the super absurd ones like Antarctica. Sorry, it's not Antarctica. But it did look at the things that were reasonably plausible. And the idea, I mean, it really is to look at really cool archaeology and examine things through a slightly different lens than had been done previously. So that also took us to Sicily, and this is obviously a reconstruction. This is not sitting there intact as a temple, but this is Selinunte on the southern part of Sicily. And Stel, do you want to explain why we were at Selinunte?
That was so long ago. Why were we? I'm trying to remember.
Because they told us to. No.
Yeah.
No, there was
it had a huge catastrophe. I mean, it was basically invaded by people I can't remember because it's past my bedtime. And it was just ransacked. The whole place was just destroyed, not by flood or fire, but just by warfare. But part of what we were seeing and part of the breadcrumbs we were following on Sicily was trying to go back in time to see, what were the connections between this was a Greek colony, and then going back further in time till we ended up, really inland with the Sicani. And so we were just following where the people came from and how they got to where they were. And so we end up on sort of the western side of Sicily, and we end up moving further and further east as we follow the clues. I can't really give too much more away because anyway, I got to know mud intimately in Sicily. So.
I can't wait to see how they filmed that, because let's just say we were in some sewers. I didn't think, they tell you go on TV, it'll be fun, and then they have you crawling through a sewer because it's archaeologically important and your life has changed. So then I will show you one of the things that got me really excited by filming in Sicily, and any of you geology oriented folks probably already know what would make me very excited. As another video. So we're going to play this for you, and we'll, I can't explain why this matters to the potential of Atlantis. Again, spoilers, I'm so sorry, but you'll have to watch the show. But here, I'll let you see this little video.
Right behind me is Mount Aetna. That's an ash plume that's coming out of the crater. And there's so much lava. Look at all the lava. This is the largest and most active volcano in Europe, and I have been waiting my entire career to come here. This is incredible.
So that is obviously me nerding out about Aetna. because it's a volcano, because it's actually one of the most dangerous volcanoes in present times. And it has a history of doing very catastrophic things that would have affected a good chunk of the Mediterranean. So without saying too much more about it, the reason we were there is because Aetna, as we're exploring potential peoples that could have originated this Atlantis myth, that it took us there. And, when you're looking for a catastrophe, you got to look at, the elephant in the room, and that's a gigantic volcano. And so I was really fortunate to have one of my colleagues actually be able to show us around there. And he is one of the volcanologists who works on Aetna, Boris Benke. And so he, having that inside perspective, and we had so many great connections with archaeologists and geologists and historians throughout the show, the whole filming process. Like, none of them, just like us, they weren't going to go, oh yeah, Atlantis was real, but they were going to say, interesting. Well, let's see what the data show. And that's kind of what we were trying to do, was of course defer to the folks who have the local expertise, because this is their backyard and we are visitors. So, and we're curious visitors. And then
right behind me
again. I didn't want to do it again. I wanted to go to the
is Mount Aetna.
there we go. Okay. We also went to Turkey. Yay, Turkey. And Stel, I know you loved these, so you get to explain what these are.
These are, they were up in almost the peak of one of the local mountains. They're from about 6000 BC, and that large figure is a mountain god. And as you step outside of the cave, you can see, like straight ahead, they had a sacrificial area that you could see straight ahead the main mountain that they were worshipping. And it's similar to some of the artwork that you get from Çatalhöyük. And they started collapsing in about 7,000, 6,500 BC. And they started heading in all kinds of directions. And this has been linked by local archaeologists to Çatalhöyük. And then we're just following them to the coast, and we're following the hypothesis of, could the people of Çatalhöyük eventually have become Atlantis people, or did they become seafaring? Did they settle on the coast after the volcano that's nicely painted on their walls sent them running? And so this is, the other interesting thing for me was, Atlas that's mentioned in it, not the king, but just the name itself, was originally an Arcadian mountain god. And so I'm still wondering whether there's some sort of prehistoric mythical connection between these two peoples, just based on these mountain gods. It's because it goes, right up into the Bosphorus, and they're all chattering away. Sorry, I'm just. My brain has gone somewhere else.
I know. When you see this stuff, I mean, we filmed this last year during COVID, and filming during a pandemic, it is a whole different thing. I mean, I've done stuff for Science Channel and Discovery before, and I'm actually like, there are so many things that I want to be doing and that I know that the TV world wants to do with science and expeditions, but it's just so much more difficult when you factor COVID in. So a lot of our production, like, we couldn't do everything we wanted to do. Like, we wanted to go and see Çatalhöyük, and we couldn't. And it was because of COVID problems. So we tried to make the show, like the producers, they were always like, how can we explain this without going COVID? Because that would date it forever. So we worked as best we could to bring, all of the most amazing things on camera and let people really see these wonders and these, this really valuable archaeology work that's going around, or that's going on around the world. But, there's always more that we could have done if we had more budget and more time, because that's really the limiting factor, especially anybody who works in TV will tell you that. So I did want to show you, now the video is going to play on the left side of the screen. This is more Turkey, but this was one of the experiences. This is the second time I've filmed in a Muslim country. And this is what happens when you're in the middle of, you're about to shoot a scene, you have a time crunch, and then call to prayer. And of course, that I think, I mean, it was always interesting to me when we were in Turkey and we could hear the call to prayer. It was like on any other time on the TV set, you know, someone's always doing something. And this was the only time where everybody just stopped, was really respectful, was silent. And it gave you this really nice bit of a breather where everybody sort of reset and then said, okay, now back to work. But I mean, I think that's one of the neat things about doing not just expedition science, but doing it on TV, is that when you're in different places where you are not the local, you are not the person with the dominant culture there, you get to learn about how day-to-day life is. And even if you're in an artificial construct, like a film set, and when your set moves with you, then it becomes even more of a learning experience. And then on the right, oh my God, this area was probably like one of my top 2 or 3 favorite parts of everywhere we went. I mean, we went all over the Mediterranean, as you can see, but Stel, you want to explain these too?
I don't know where you are. I'm trying to recognize it. Is that?
Oh, it's Turkey, the southern coast of Turkey.
Oh, it's the other southern parts of Turkey. Oh, with
Yep.
that was
Yes.
spectacular.
Yep.
With the sunken staircases going down.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, it was like a whole, you know, this was just, you know, you say, well, Atlantis can't exist, and then you turn up to these islands and there's a whole bunch of buildings already flooded. They're very recognizable buildings because sea level is rising, and it's still going. And that was that was one of those places where my eyes couldn't rest, because it didn't matter. It was a ton of these little islands in a bay, and every time you came around a corner, there was another spectacular thing to look at. That was the one with
They had the tombs.
the tombs that looked like, I don't know, I can't even describe them. There was one right by the beach, just stuck up out of the water.
If you made a roll-top desk, they look like roll-top desk, but they were tombs, and they stick out of the water now because the sea level has risen since this stuff was built. So not only is part of the city underwater, but these tombs are like in this shallow bay now where tourists are frolicking, and it's quite a sight. And I'd never been to Turkey either. I mean, yes, there's a huge fault zone up there, but it was a place that was totally new to me, totally new to almost everybody on the crew, and I would go back in a heartbeat. Plus, without spoiling anything, we found some amazing stuff in Turkey. And when I say we found, like, we actually got on ground penetrating radar some stuff that is just really cool. And it would be fantastic to have somebody fund, you know, actual real archaeological research. Oops, I hit the space bar, sorry. But I'm that excited, I'm gesticulating wildly. So we will go to the last little bit here. And this is just, you know, a little behind the scenes perspective. That was us in the Velaspila cave. The professor we were working with is there on the left. And then there's Stel, me, our camera guy, Chris, one of the producers, Emily, and Steve, another camera guy. And then on the right-hand side, we've got one of our Italian fixers. We've got Chris, the camera guy again. Actually, he's the DP, director of photography. You have Stel, Gary, the medic / Swiss Army knife of a human. Me, Boris Benke, the volcanologist who I work with. Tim, the sound guy, Steve, the other camera guy, and again, Emily, the producer. And this is a really stripped down crew. Like, we did not have anybody like extra or superfluous with us because of COVID. So we tested a bunch. We had to meet a bunch of health requirements to go in and out of these countries and get special exemptions. So would I film during COVID again? I guess the answer is we're all going to have to if we ever want to make any more expedition TV, because COVID is still here. But it was also a pretty unique and exciting experience. And of course, in that right-hand picture, you can see Mount Aetna is there in the background, puffing away, doing its eruption that it is still doing. And, you know, basically the show, for me, and this is sort of my final thought before we get into the Q&A part, but, you know, I really did like roll my eyes and laugh when I first heard about the concept. And I was really cognizant of not coming in there and being like, we have all the solutions, because we don't. Like, Stel and I, we have not spent our entire life working on these archaeological digs. But what we did get to do is highlight a lot of scientists who are doing fantastic research, historians, scientists, archaeologists, you know, they're all doing this, whether it's analyzing chemical compositions of artifacts in the lab, or out on their hands and knees in the hot sun doing a dig, or back, doing research, digging up, or I should say collating all the data that comes in from the field. And it was really spectacular to be part of this and to lend expertise about, is there a plausible catastrophe in this part of the world that would align with Stel's hypothetical timeline for Atlantis? So I appreciated the chance to do it. And I was actually pleasantly surprised that the show incorporates a good amount of science. Like when we did cosmogenic nuclide dating, which is also known as exposure age dating, and something I've done a lot in my career, they gave it airtime on the screen. Like Stel explains what we're doing, and then I got to explain what we were doing. And it was cool. They didn't cut that part out, where I think a lot of shows would have. So anyway, that's my take. Now, Stel, your final thoughts?
No, I loved working with you. I learned a lot. I'm not a field researcher. I mean, I sat at a desk working this out and hitting the books. It was great to see environments through your eyes, and just to kind of like learn, geology in a whole new way, and to talk to, experts in their fields at their dig sites was just invaluable. I mean, it was just kind of like you got to learn so many like nuances that never make it into a show, but they had to keep dragging me away from these locations because I just kept asking everybody questions. But it was just, I think that to me, that's the most exciting part, is seeing all of this fifth millennium archaeology and geology in a way I've never really seen before. I mean, it doesn't get a billing as being sexy, the beginning of civilization. It's not a pyramid, but it's some of the most mind-bendingly advanced elements of society that were created then and there. I mean, you start getting pre-money, you start domesticating cows, you start building walls, you start going to war. Society as we know it started at that point. And I think it's really important for us on how to understand it, and then how to not die in a flood, but that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of how not to let the earth kill you. But I think that basically, check out the show. I mean, hopefully you'll enjoy it, or at least be mildly entertained. And if you're not, that's okay too. But so far, we've seen that the scientists and the researchers that we worked with were really excited to get the opportunity to give their work a broader audience. And so I hope that we succeeded in that. And so, yeah, that's what we came prepared to discuss. So I will turn my screen share off and let Steve have the reins again.
And I just want to say, if you hear squeaking, that's my dog with her toy.
Mine's back there. He's just being all cute and quiet.
Okay, well, thank you, Jess and Stel. I got your name correct that time. It's very interesting, and I can't wait to watch the show because I have a million questions myself. You just gave us a little teaser, and we've got a lot of questions that came in. So I'd like to be able to ask them, and maybe we could have pretty concise and short answers so we can get through all of them, because there's a lot of very good questions. The first one is from Diane Fiedler, who says, why are we studying king lists? So is there a way to answer that quickly?
Yes, king lists, because in Plato, it says about how they worked out when Atlantis existed, while Solon, who's the one who brought the story back from Egypt, was in Egypt, and he's talking to an Egyptian priest, and they're talking about how they worked out when Atlantis existed, and that was by adding up all the years of the different kings. And so you can't really understand the years that passed without looking at a king list, because when you look at a king list, you realize you double count a bunch of years. And so that tells you that it's not linear 9,000 years, it's somewhere in between. Does that answer it?
Okay, well, that'll be up to Diane. Now, Alex Moore writes, is there any new geological, archaeological, or other explanation of what orichalcum was and why it's connected to Atlantis? Now, I have to say I looked it up when this question came in, so I'm curious too. what it has to do with Atlantis.
You want to take that one, Jess, or shall I?
Well, I mean, you can explain the connection to Atlantis, but basically it appears from what I know about it, which is admittedly limited, that it is copper, essentially like a copper porphyry, but it's basically a metal that has copper as part of it. But I don't think anybody has conclusively nailed down exactly what orichalcum is, as referenced in Plato.
Yeah, no one's conclusively nailed it down. It literally translates as mountain copper. What mountain copper is, no one knows, but in our timeline, 4,900 BC, plus or minus, copper is only mined in the mountains in Serbia at the time. And it could be that that's just a throwback word to just regular old copper. I mean, they found some ingots a few years ago on a ship from around a couple of hundred years BC, and they thought it was orichalcum, and I think it turned out to be bronze or something.
So long answer to say that we believe it's copper or some sort of copper plus other stuff, but
yeah.
There hasn't a definitive answer, at least. I mean, even when we asked the archaeologists in the field, we said, do you know exactly what it is? No. And again, that's what happens when you're taking something from a myth and you're trying to substantiate it. I mean, you may never get a conclusive answer.
Right.
Now, that's a good answer. Get a conclusive answer. I like that.
Yeah.
All right, the next one's from Dave Dolan. And he wants to know what your opinion of Mark Adams' book, quote, Meet Me in Atlantis, My Obsessive Quest to Find the Sunken City.
I haven't read it. Do you know it, Stel?
I've not read it.
Oh, well, then you have to. You're the Atlantis guy.
I should read that, but that I haven't.
Adams is also the author of the bestseller Turn Right at Machu Picchu. In his book on Atlantis, Adams refers to and quotes Lowell Thomas awardee and Explorers Club fellow David Gallo about Atlantis. By the way, for many years, there were rumors that the search for the lost city of Atlantis would be a potential plot scheme for the next Indiana Jones movie. I guess, according to Dave, we'll find out next summer if this is true when Indy 5 is released.
Well, if next summer we suddenly get invited to the premiere because we're the Atlantis people, you'll know there's Atlantis in it. So,
oh God, am I gonna be the Atlantis person along with you, Stel? Oh my, that's a career direction I never saw coming. But yes, I'm pretty sure Stel's gonna read that book now, Dave.
Well, the funny thing is I own both of them, but I've not read them yet. They're on my Kindle.
All right, well, we got Diane Fiedler coming back, which is a really easy question. What's the name of the pyramid island? I'd like to know that too.
Oh,
you might have said it, but
Dascalio.
Dascalio, yeah. Was it DHASK?
It depended who you spoke to.
Yeah.
So
it's near Naxos. It's east of Naxos, and it just sound out Dascalio. There is an H in there. It's either DASKHALIO or DHASKALIO. But it's beautiful, and you can actually stay on an island close by, but you generally don't get to go to Dascalio unless you're part of an archaeological dig. Which what was Michael's last name? Do you remember, Stel, the researcher that we worked with at Cambridge?
Yeah, I've got his card in my wallet.
Yeah, he's amazing, and he's a researcher at Cambridge, but he also works in Greece a lot of the time doing this excavation of Dascalio. And so they do take researchers, especially if you're a student. So sign up for classes and then go research on this pyramid off the coast of, Greek islands.
I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
Anyway, Diane had one other question, and we'll move on. And she says, are you all talking about Santorini as a possible former Atlantis? Now, I know myself, having been in Santorini, I hate to say it, over 40 years ago, and snorkeling around and seeing sunken cities off the coast of Santorini. Actually, there are many of them all around the Greek islands. So what do you think about that?
I don't think we can say without spoiling the episodes that are coming up like this week or next week.
Yeah, I'll raise the stakes. If it is, then my theory is completely falls apart.
Yeah, and that has to do
that's
with
the great
dates,
thing.
That has to do with the dates of the eruptions of the Thera volcano at Santorini. So, but you can see the whole process that gets us there, because we do try to thoroughly investigate it, because it is such in everybody's mind, they're like, oh, it's Santorini. It has to be Santorini. So of course we had to go and look at it. And again, the show was not just about like, so in science, you don't try to confirm your hypothesis, you try to break your hypothesis. And so Stel's hypothesis about Atlantis being about 4900 BC, the whole point of the show is, can we break that? Can we disprove it? And so we go to these locations, not saying, let's get confirmation for his idea, but like, let's try to poke holes in it and see if it stands up.
Well stated. I'm going to put you on that someday. Another question. We hear that Atlantis was built with red and black stones. I didn't hear that, but somebody did. Are there other areas that are built with stones that are red and black that you guys know?
Well, they actually said red, white, and black. There's actually white in there too. And as I kept yelling to everybody on the crew during the entire shoot, red, white, and black are very commonly volcanic rocks. So, I mean, you get rhyolite that can be reddish, even basaltic rock, basaltic lava oxidizes red brown. White could be tuff or pumice. It's kind of a dirty grayish white. And you do, black is basaltic, or, if it's an intrusive volcanic rock, it could be gabbro. There are, when they said red, white, and black rocks, I didn't really remember the Atlantis myth when I started doing the show. And so I had to go back and dig into it. And when I said, oh my God, they keep talking about these red, white, and black rocks, that's volcanism, volcanism, volcanism. So of course I want it to have been destroyed by a volcano, but that doesn't mean that my pet idea has any merit whatsoever.
Right, because I mean, you get to Çatalhöyük and everything's painted red, white, and black. So are you talking about decorated stones or natural stones?
Yeah.
We don't know.
Good point, and I don't know the answer. And I guess maybe someday one of us will. So Isaiah says, I always thought the Minoans could potentially be the Atlantans, since we were never really able to decipher their language. I don't know if that's true or not. Hopefully someday someone can figure it out from their language. Do you know anything about that?
Well, there's linear A and there's linear B. There's two different alphabets, and one of them was translated and one of them wasn't. So yes, there's a lot of documents that have yet to be read, including the Phaistos disc. No one knows what's on that. And it would be interesting. I know certainly, things like genetically, we know they ended up becoming the Mycenaeans. We also know that sort of Poseidon seems to get his start on Crete as a Minoan god. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, until someone can crack it, we've no idea. It could be a bunch of receipts from.
I hope it's recipes for like 101 ways to cook fish or something. No, it's probably something pretty interesting, legitimately interesting. But yeah, I actually found that pretty fascinating. I know I'd heard of linear A and B a long time ago, back in the day when I was a history major as an undergrad, but I had never paid much attention to it. And then we actually saw, basically etched into rock, different examples of the languages. And it was pretty amazing to think that, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, if you're not up on day-to-day stuff in the archaeological world, to think that, as advanced as we think we are as a, human species, that there's still so much we don't know about our own past. I mean, we are constantly learning and discovering, and anyone who tells you that everything has been explored and discovered, except for stuff in space, they've got it all wrong. I mean, even just a language we still haven't been able to crack.
That's why there's an Explorers Club.
Exactly.
Those answers. All right, Deborah Ward asks, are the young science upcoming students interested in continuing this exploration? Is it being brought to schools? Is there a plan to do that? No,
Not yet.
Okay.
Well, Stel talks to kids a lot. He actually writes young adult novels. You should start telling him about Atlantis.
I write sort of sci-fi middle grade stuff. So, and I go to a lot of schools and do talks. And maybe after the show, they'll not want to talk about my books and talk about the show instead. But it depends. I mean, it depends on how well the show does, and it depends on the reaction from the public as to whether or not we'll start taking it out to schools.
Yeah.
Whether or not they teach it in the schools or they throw darts at it. One of the
Right.
Yeah. And you know what? It's like I do, a lot of hard science work in geology and environmental research. But then I also do TV, science on TV. And it's funny because obviously the language of our time seems to be digital and, coming through to everybody's supercomputer that they carry in their pocket. So if we can get people excited, not just about Atlantis, but about field science, about exploration, about putting in the work. I mean, Stel put in a lot of work to try to put this hypothesis together. And, being somebody involved in research means that you have to be willing to have people throw darts at your stuff, which, yeah, I mean, that's what happens. And again, you can't take it personally. So what I try to do is put out there how exciting it is to learn about our planet, about the people who inhabit it, about the other animals we share it with. And then about the stories that are written into the rocks, into the landscape. So if we can get, even just a few people jazzed up about what came before, and hopefully get some funding to those researchers who are doing the real boots on the ground work day to day, then I think we'll have accomplished something that actually, matters, whether or not we find Atlantis ever.
Right. So you hear that, Discovery Channel executives? Help support the explorers even more than you already are. Okay. Alex Gianetti says, congratulations, Stel, for founding or finding a new chronology than the 12,000 BC. I'm just reading it, the Texas. You check Solon's sources in the Alexandria's library?
The Alexandria Library burnt down a long time ago, and I'm still very upset about it.
Okay, so I don't know anything about that.
Yeah, so he's basically he's saying there was a library, and then I think it was Caesar, or it could have been Antony. I can't remember. I'm not a Roman person. Burnt this library to the ground, and there's all of human knowledge was supposedly in it, and it's very annoying. So, but no, I couldn't have checked anything from there. None of that stuff exists.
Okay, Tyler writes, have you ever heard of the work of Carlson and Graham Hancock? They documented evidence around the world of extreme geological activity that they date to the original Atlantean period of around 10,000 BC. Additionally, using geographical insights directly from Plato, they developed the hypothesis Atlantis is on the seabed at the intersection of three tectonic, I guess he means plates, in the Azores Plateau. Jess, or any of you, or Stel, does that make any sense to you?
Makes sense to me, but I fundamentally disagree. Some of those books are, I've read a lot of them just for fiction writing years ago, and but you do any sort of scratching of the surface, and there's so many errors in them, and omissions, and just plain twisting of actual archaeology and history that it's just frustrating to read. I'll just leave it at that.
I've never read any of it, so all I know is what triple junctions are.
I did, so you didn't have to. So.
Yeah, I don't know. This is one of those things where I go, I know the geology, but yep.
Yeah.
All right, so here's a question from, I think I'm pronouncing it correctly, Llewellyn Toulmin. Some years ago, there were articles claiming that Atlantis had been found just west of the Straits of Gibraltar. What happened to that theory or hypothesis, depending on the way you want to call it?
I have no idea. I don't know which. There's so many west of the. You've got Doggerland. You've got the Irish. The Celtic Shelf. You've got UK itself. I mean, there's all kinds of theories.
And then the Azores, right? The Azores, or
Azores, the Canary Islands. Torcy Mount. Spartle Bank. I mean, it just goes on and on. Yeah.
All right. Well, we got time for two more questions, and that's what I got left, and we have to wrap it up.
Okay.
It's time to wrap it up after that. So this is from Darren. What are the top highlights of Plato's theory, and which criteria are you testing against?
The highlights for me are, you've got to have a catastrophe that's plausible. You've got to have a wealthy seafaring civilization, so they've got to have all of those aspects. They've got to have that kind of circular shape, and they've got to have had evidence of ancient warfare. The thing about mythology is the more specific it gets, the less likely it's real. Tends to be stuff that was added later. So the real mythology, the real bits of it you're looking at are all the big stuff, the big catastrophe, the big god doing this. And generally, when you follow those rules, you can find things like, Oregon with the lake there that was created out of a volcano, and there's mythology that links it.
Mazama, it was Mount Mazama, and then
right, and then you've got Patrick Nunn doing incredible work in Australia, where he's finding Aboriginal myths and he's lining them up with geological flooding in various different areas around the coast. But the more specific it gets, the less likely it's real. And so that's why I think when you look at Plato's writing, you've got a bit of a real myth and you've got a whole bunch of stuff he added to it.
All right, the last question is from TJ Mascaro. How has your view of the historiography of the ancient world changed through this experience, if at all?
Well, for me, it recontextualized it for me, because like I just mentioned, I was a history major as an undergrad. So I have a BA in history, but it was on art and architecture of Julio-Claudian Rome. And I loved mythology, Greek mythology in particular as a kid, but also a lot of the indigenous peoples of North America. I loved their mythology too, mythologies. But for me, it kind of said, all right, what are we really trying to figure out if we're chasing some sort of myth? Are we really looking for confirmation that everything happened in exactly that way? Like, are we really hunting for, Triton with a gold covered city under the waves? Like, no, we are not. What we are trying to do is identify these things that are salient from the story that were worth passing down. And you know what? People are not that creative. I know we love to think we're like insanely creative and everybody's brilliant, but in reality, if somebody tells a story about something, it draws on an experience that they or someone else they know has had, and then it gets passed on. So for me, it was like, okay, maybe we're never going to find an Atlantis, with, looks like the Little Mermaid's conceptualization of it, but we will find a lot of fascinating pieces of the puzzle about how our society got to be where we are today and the things that connect us all across the millennia.
Very well stated, Jess. But I do want to get that golden Triton. I think.
I know, right?
Anyway, I want to thank Jess and Stel for taking the time to share their experiences with everybody. And I want to thank everyone watching from Norway, Sweden, South America, and everyone else around the world who might be tuning in. And want to also remind you that next week, there is an exciting new program, and I have to scroll down to get the message here, so bear with me. Next Monday, we'll have our first World Elephant Week at the Explorers Club for all you pachyderm enthusiasts. It will be 4 nights of everything you want to know about elephants and more, starting on Monday night with Elephants 101 and ending with a special World Elephant Day program on Thursday. Speakers will include Mark Fowler, VP of Conservation, Brian Christie, Andreas Crosta, I'm so terrible with language, Patricia Sims, Satish Venkatesh, and many more. We hope you'll join us next week for Elephant Week. I can't wait for that one too. But I really want to thank you guys. I appreciate the fact that you're looking for answers that are difficult to find, asking the questions that a lot of people are afraid to ask, and you're trying, and that's what counts, because that's how we find new discoveries that upend what we previously knew. Thanks again, everybody, and see you next week.